Is this the classic escalation trap, Mr. Mearsheimer? Good evening, and thank you for speaking with us here at CNN News 18. My first question to you is, has Donald Trump got caught in an escalation trap?
I think there's no question about that. The problem that President Trump faces is that the United States has lost this war. And if we go back to the Memorandum of Understanding that was signed on June 17th, this was the memorandum that looked like it was going to end the war. It was basically a surrender document. The United States gave in to Iran on every point. In other words, Iran won on every point. And the reason is that the United States did not have a military strategy to defeat Iran. Now, what's happened since June 17th is that the United States tried to open a separate channel in the Persian Gulf through the Strait of Hormuz that the Iranians refused to accept. So we've now got back to a situation where the two sides are attacking each other with these tit-for-tat military strikes. But the problem is the United States can't win this battle, just like it couldn't win the battle before June 17th. And that's why we had to sign the Memorandum of Understanding. Nothing has changed. The United States does not have a magic formula for defeating Iran. So President Trump can escalate all he wants, but it's not going to do any good because the Iranians will match the United States at every point, and we don't gain an advantage.
And they can do it far more cost effectively. Would you agree that?
Absolutely. You want to remember that one of the principal reasons that we ended the air war on April 8th, it's important to understand that the war started on February 28th. On April 8th, we ended the air war and we moved to a naval blockade. This is a long time before the Memorandum of Understanding is signed. The reason that we ended the air war is that we were running out of munitions. The United States does not have an endless supply of munitions or weapons that it can use to conduct a large-scale air offensive. So we're in a position today where we have to be very careful that we don't use up almost all of the remaining weapons that we have. So you're absolutely right that Iran using these ballistic missiles and drones that they have is at a great advantage against the United States, which has all of this expensive weaponry, but only limited numbers of the weapons.
On a slightly macro perspective, does this also signal the end of the American hegemony across the world? Is now America as a global power, is it a thing of a past, global military power?
Let me make 2 points. First of all, America's position as the most powerful state in the world by far ended in about 2017 when the world went from unipolar to multipolar. It's when China and Russia became great powers. So the days when the United States was the only great power in the world, this is the famous unipolar moment, ended in 2017. So we are now in a position, we meaning the United States, where we face two other great powers, and one of them, China, threatens to become as powerful as the United States. So independent of the Iran war, we have lost our position as the world's only great power. The second point I would make to you is if the United States loses the war against Iran, it will have no effect on America's position in the global balance of power. When I was young, we lost the war in Vietnam, and it was a disastrous defeat for the United States. but it had no effect on the balance of power. And in fact, 14 years later, the Soviet Union collapsed and the United States became the unipole. So it's just important to understand that the United States is an incredibly powerful country. And the only threat to its power in the international system is not what happens in Iran, but it's China.
But whatever happens with Iran has a direct bearing on China, because many believe that the Chinese are also operating in the shadows and they have helped with Iran a lot. They've collaborated with Iran and they've also learned from Iran, be it their missile technology, their drone technology, and of course they'll be studying the wargaming. There is also the intelligence that's being, and many believe even right now the shipping to China continues, the trade with China via the rail route via Golistan continues, and America has not been able to hurt China in this war much. So do you see China becoming far more stronger, Russia becoming far more stronger and resolved, because America's focus on Ukraine will be a little diluted? Do you see this shift happening because of what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz and with Iran?
I think there is no question that China and Russia have benefited from this war. And I also think, unsurprisingly, that there's no question that both China and Russia are helping the Iranians fight against the Americans. They would be crazy not to help the Iranians. The United States is a mortal enemy to both Russia and to China. And Russia and China have a deep-seated interest in making sure that the United States loses its war against Iran. So they're giving the Iranians weaponry and they're giving the Iranians intelligence, which is very important for Iran waging the war. But just to go to China for a moment, if you're China and you're worrying about the United States pivoting to Asia to contain China, what you want to do is get the United States bogged down in a war in the Middle East so that it takes precious resources away from East Asia and sends them to the Middle East, so that it uses up precious weaponry fighting against Iran that it doesn't have to use against China. So there's no question that from a Chinese point of view, and also from a Russian point of view, that this war is a good thing as long as the United States loses. And of course, those two countries, Russia and China, will do everything they can for good strategic reasons to make sure that we lose.
What happens to the Gulf countries here? We'll come to Israel in a bit, Mr. Mearsheimer, but the Gulf countries, all those who allowed America to set up bases on the promise that America will protect these countries, etc., will they now recalibrate? Do we see a fresh arms race in the Gulf region where every nation tries to now become militarily stronger to try and match Iran?
I think there's no question that this war has had disastrous consequences for American military bases in the region and for America's alliance with the Gulf states. On February 27th, the day before the war started, it looked like the United States had this very formidable alliance and basing system in the Persian Gulf. After the war started, it became clear that that was not true. These bases that were spread out among the Gulf states were highly vulnerable to Iranian drones and Iranian missiles. And in fact, by all accounts, the Iranians have either badly damaged or destroyed every single American base in the region. Furthermore, if you're the Gulf states and you're depending on the United States to provide security for you, if anything, the exact opposite has happened. Because you're allied with the United States, your country has become a giant magnet for attracting Iranian missiles and attracting Iranian drones. This is a disaster for the Gulf states. So the question then becomes, what do the Gulf states do moving forward? And furthermore, what does the United States do moving forward? Do we rebuild those bases? Do we try to rebuild the alliance structure? Do those Gulf states have a vested interest in being allied with the United States? I think the Gulf states are going to alter their foreign policies in very important ways. And I think most of all, they're going to try to reach an accommodation with the Iranians because they understand the Iranians can do so much damage to them. Furthermore, I think the Chinese will play an increasingly important role in the Middle East. And countries in that region will go to great lengths to have good relations, of course, with the United States. It's not like they're going to have bad relations with the United States, but they won't have relations that were as close as they once were. And on the other hand, they'll have closer relations with Iran and closer relations with China.
But do you believe that the Strait of Hormuz now will be permanently controlled by Iran?
I think there's no question that's the case. The United States has abundant military assets in the Gulf today, and we are trying very hard to control the strait and make sure that Iran does not control the strait. But the fact is, Iran does control the strait. The ships that are getting through, normally about 130 ships get through every day. It looks like there are about 10 or 12 ships getting through today. And all of those ships are going through the Iranian-controlled channel. In other words, they have to get permission from Iran. None of those ships are going through the channel that the United States would like them to go through, that runs along the Omani coast. So if you look at what the situation is today, it's quite clear that Iran controls the Gulf, and Iran has made it manifestly clear that it plans to control the Gulf forever.
So that clearly tells these nations that they put their eggs in the wrong basket, especially with the US. Does that also then tell all the other countries which had US bases and which were depending on US for security that that's not going to happen? Nations like Indonesia, Japan, Korea, so many others who would now turn around and say, we'd rather de-link from the US and build capabilities of our own.
I don't think so. I think what's happening in the Gulf is very different from what's happening, let's just talk about East Asia with countries like South Korea, Japan, Indonesia, the Philippines, and so forth and so on. I think the United States has a deep-seated interest in containing China, as do those countries in East Asia that we were just listing. And those countries plus the United States will work together to contain the Chinese. This is not to deny that by getting deeply involved in the Middle East, the United States has weakened its position in East Asia. There's no question about that. But it's not like those countries in East Asia that are allies of the United States, say South Korea and Japan, are going to break relations with the United States and go out on their own. They cannot do that because they're dealing with China, which is an incredibly powerful state. They need help from the United States. So I don't think that other countries around the world that are now allied with the United States will abandon their alliances with the United States because of this disaster in the Middle East.
How do you see Israel in this? Is Israel now a vital cog? Is it a headache that the Americans cannot do, something that's stuck in their throat, they can neither spit nor swallow? Is that how Israel's stature is? Or is America worried that if Israel is left to fend for itself, it may just go Samson against Iran?